One thing that's true for all moms, we have a lot of stories to tell. Some are silly, some are gross, some bring us to tears. With each story that's shared, another mom feels a little less alone. So join us as we laugh, learn, and grow together. It's the iMom Podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the iMom Podcast. It's been a few years since Susan and I have had toddlers. Chloe, you are like inches away from James toddling, I'm sure. He'll be there any day now. He's advanced for his age, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But Megan, you are all toddling around your house. So how old is your little one now? Beckett's 2?
So he's about 19 months, so 1.5.
Okay.
I love when people are like, I have a 36-month-old. You're like, you're great.
I have a 74-month-old. You're like, wait a minute, 12 times 12.
Yeah.
Plus 12.
So he's basically 1.5. And then I have James, who is 4.5. They're almost exactly 3 years apart. So yes, we are in the thick of toddlers.
And you never yell, right?
Never. Oh, never. The Italian in me, never.
Today's episode is asking whether it's possible to get a toddler to listen without yelling. I'm sure the answer is yes, but I never achieved it. So Megan, what do you got for us?
Yes, I have not. I still have not achieved it because sometimes you just get so mad that that's just what happens. However, as my patience has grown, I feel like I have gotten a little bit better at it, in that I don't let stuff bother me as much. And I don't think I react as much as I did with James initially, which poor kid, he's, I guess the oldest is kind of your guinea pig. But it's funny because I feel like at different points, my husband and I are better about not yelling. Like there's times where things just make me so mad that I want to yell and vice versa. And so we've just really tried to work on it because I think in their little minds, when you yell, it really freaks them out. And I've seen his face just drop when I really get stern and yell. And then he starts crying, and then it's like a whole mess because he's crying. I feel bad. It's like, so I've really tried to stop in the situation and go, okay, how can I sit him down and just talk to him about this calmly, but stern enough that he understands that what he did was wrong or dangerous or whatever it might be, so that he doesn't do it again.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've both really tried to work on and not overreact in the moment and just really get down on his level and talk about the situation. I do have mixed feelings about it because sometimes I think if it's something dangerous or, if they run out into the street into traffic, like they need to be yelled at because they need to be afraid to never do it again. But then there's just small situations where like they spill something all over the rug and it's like, is it really?
I think most of us are yelling more often at the silly stuff than the kids running out in traffic, unfortunately.
Right.
That's probably more common. It's interesting you mentioned that like James's face and whatever. My older son would keep it together if I yelled. The little one cries. And so it's just interesting. Like Susan, I don't know if you experience different reactions from your different kids when you yell and how that kind of makes you change your behavior. Like if Liam, being the older one, was the one that like got scared and cried, I would probably be like, oh my gosh, I need to stop yelling right now. But he kind of just had a stiff upper lip and put up with it. Did your kids react differently?
No, and it was a problem because when you're in the moment and you feel like yelling, you're not going, let me adjust my style here to meet this child. Megan would get paralyzed. Like she gets very panicked when someone yells. Emily could care less whether you're yelling or not. She's going to do what she's going to do. And Marky would like stone face me like,
That's interesting. Yeah.
So they were all different.
Yeah. So how are your kids in listening? Like, what would you say drives you to the point of yelling? Because I think that getting a kid to listen without yelling, it depends on like what their temperament is and whether or not they do listen for a second or third time, or if they're just like very obstinate. I think that can send us up.
Yeah, to me, it's the willful defiance. When I've asked multiple times and it's happened multiple times throughout the day and it's looking me dead in the eye and doing the exact opposite of whatever I told them not to do.
Yeah.
So that to me really just like, it's like, come on, I've asked you this 3 times. This has happened multiple times throughout the day and I'm just kind of over it. Whereas instead of my mistakes are, I shouldn't ask multiple times. It should be, immediate consequences if they don't do it the first time. But then, because I feel like that's when you nip it in the bud. But sometimes I'm just don't want to stop what I'm doing, or I'm in the middle of something, or, I just don't want to make a scene or whatever it might be. I don't want to deal with it. So I'll just keep asking and asking and asking instead of taking action and providing them a consequence right then and there for not obeying the first time.
Yeah. Do you think that what you say when you yell matters as much as the yelling? Do you understand what I'm asking? Like,
yeah, no, I do, because my oldest will look at me and he'll go, "Why are you angry at me? Why are you mad at me?" And it's he's not even receiving what I'm saying. It's the tone that's like wigging him out versus what I'm saying. And then I have to say, well, because you haven't obeyed. But I think then the point kind of gets missed because he's only observing the tone and the anger instead of what I'm trying to discipline him for, if that makes sense.
It's making me think of this article we have on gentle parenting. I think that's the one. And it asks mom, and it's kind of a tall order, but it asks mom to consider the child's developmental stage and like what can be expected of them at that age. And like something you said a moment ago, Megan, and I'm not criticizing you because I did the exact same thing, but like, oh, I want him to obey. And then you said, if I'm in the middle of something, or I'm like, so we have to imagine our child is in the middle of something that he is doing, that he wants to be doing, and he's 2. And so when we ask them to do something and they don't automatically respond, well, it's because they're playing and they want to be playing.
Yeah, this is the situation. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah. It's
I
hard.
do think, especially with toddlers, actions are so much stronger than words. You just you can keep asking and your tone going up and up instead of just picking up the toy or whatever and removing it, or sometimes just removing the child and carrying them upstairs and say, Mommy asked you to do this three times, and I know you understood me, but you weren't listening because you were having so much fun. So you're going to go sit in your crib for a few minutes, or wherever, and just think about that. And but it's hard because I do feel like we multitask more as moms. And so stopping and taking the time to understand the situation, watch the child's reaction, and then take action is a whole lot of more energy than just verbalizing while we're cooking dinner, or verbalizing while we're finishing work, or verbalizing while we're talking to somebody else. And that's kind of the difficult thing.
I did see this somewhere too. Sometimes when we ask kids to do something, it's like too much of an ask. Like if you say, go clean up your toys, sometimes kids feel overwhelmed by that versus saying like, why don't you pick up all the like monster trucks, or like narrowing it down to a smaller task so they feel like they can complete it versus like a really big task for toddlers.
Yeah. I think that one thing I've noticed, and this kind of applies to older kids, but I think I did it when my kids were toddlers also. I ask them to do something like 2 or 3 times before I actually intentionally like speak to them and say it. And so by the time I do get on their level and say, I'm serious about this, I'm already built up. I've already got some frustration built up because I wasn't, like you said, Susan, I was multitasking. I was doing something else as I was asking them to do it. So like, when your thermometer is rising because in your mind, you're expecting something, but they're not even in the same like room as you half the time. So
we forget how little they are. But, that's why if you've ever like shadowed in the nursery at church or in a preschool, you see they have like songs like clean up time, clean up. And then the kids go in motion. They just know this song. So it is kind of, they're little, teaching them what these things are. If you, like Megan said, you give them instructions they don't understand, they're just going to zone out.
Yeah. We do have an article on ways to get your toddler to listen. One of the ideas, of course, is make eye contact. Or if your child isn't like, some kids have a problem with eye contact, especially if they're on the autism spectrum, but you can ask your child to turn her body toward you, or you can move your finger like from her eyes to yours to give her a line of sight. That might help them just become engaged with what you're saying. Another idea was to turn her listening ears on. So you can like actually like wiggle their ears or something. And that gives them like another sense to get in touch with what you're asking them to do. Or say, let's turn our listening ears on. And then, did you know this? I found this out. so if you gently massage your ears from the top down to the lobe, and then ask your kid to do the same. So you start at like the cartilagey spot, and then you rub down to the lobe. It releases endorphins, and it's supposed to like, just give you all the feel good feels.
Did you get that off Runaway Bride with the dog?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm going to say no.
Wait, Abby is applying.
There's a scene in Runaway Bride, and when she's panicking about walking down the aisle, her bridesmaids are like, rub your ears. She goes, if you rub your ears, like she said the same thing you just said. And then one of the bridesmaids turns her and goes, we do it to the dog.
Well, a lot of stuff that works on dogs does work on toddlers, so it might not be such a bad idea.
Good tip. I will say this. Sometimes, our toddlers aren't listening. Remember the situation too. Like sometimes a perfectly obedient toddler, picking up a puzzle or something when you tell them would be the norm. But if they're overtired or they miss a nap, sometimes you can't get mad at them because of their situation. They're sick or they're tired, and you just have to give them grace and go, okay, we can't handle this today.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to get mad about it.
Read the room. Yeah. I also love this idea that I'd never heard of before, but practice focused listening. So, there's just a lot of things that are going on. And so as you're going throughout your day with your toddler, you can say things like, do you hear the sound of that bird? Do you hear that bird chirping? Could that be the sound of a garbage truck? And that helps them to actually like focus on one sound and hear it, which in theory then would help them tune into your voice and hear it when there might be some other things that are happening.
Another thing I do a lot, and I actually did it with James just a few weeks ago, is play, I'm Marmy to James. Marmy says, like Simon says, it's great practice for them. This is what I do. The other one is Mother May I. You can take 3 steps forward. You can take 2 steps back. You have to do this because they learn, do what Marmy says.
Yeah, that's great.
That. That's one of my favorite tips that I learned about kids that have like impulse control issues is to play red light, green light, but do it backwards, where red means go and green means stop, because then they have to be even more in tune with like listening and controlling. All of us would struggle with that, honestly. If you say red light and you're supposed to go, like we would all really have to, have some serious control. So what about, Megan, have you noticed that your kids listen at sometimes better than others, like time of the day? I'm sure like when they're tired, obviously they don't listen as well, but have you noticed like certain scenarios where you think that they are better at listening and you don't have to yell?
Yeah, I can tell if they've had sugar. Sugar is a big one for us. That has a lot of behavioral issues. So I have to really think about when I'm going to give them sugar. Sleep is definitely a big one. If they haven't gotten enough sleep and I can tell they're tired, that's definitely a big one. Towards the end of the day, we tend to be really tired. So they definitely do better in the morning. But I think it's all pretty typical stuff. There isn't anything that I can directly point to besides sugar and sleep. Yeah. But
I had one where overstimulation was a problem. Like I took him to the movies once, and I'll tell you, I didn't take him to a movie again for several years.
Yes, overstimulation and crowds too. Actually, one of mine in crowds does not do well. It's like, I think it's because of overstimulation. It's like too many people.
I think my kids now, and it's been like this since they were little, they don't listen as well if they have had a lot of screen time. And I'm not knocking screen time. I'm just saying like, if
it's a thing.
Yeah, if all of it has been fed to them and they've had all these like colors and lights and sounds and they just have to sit there and veg, then when it comes time to listen, it takes a lot of effort to actually listen.
Would probably say that about me.
I think we talked about this in a previous episode too, of like certain shows are more overstimulating than others. I think we actually put a list, but they will say different, I don't know what it would be called, like different animations and things like that can be more overstimulating than others.
Yeah.
And the colors.
I wrote an article on it. Even when the character goes from like one scene to another and it doesn't show how they got there, like that's not as good for toddlers.
Wow.
Yeah. Like they want, it's the best shows are the ones that actually show the character walking from one room to the other, or there's like a process for how they get from one scene to the next.
Wow.
So like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. When he walks,
well,
little train.
He takes the trolley to make believe it. Yeah, I love that.
Stands the test of time.
Does so how frustrating? I'm not even going to ask if it happens or not, Megan. I'm just going to ask you how frustrating it is if your kids listen to one of you and not the other. Like, do they listen to your husband more?
It's different times.
All right.
It's really when they get the answer from one that they didn't want and they go to the other. But I think it's a good balance because I see them more throughout the day because I work from home. And then at the end of the day, when I'm like tapped out, my husband usually comes home and like takes it over. Or to be honest, I don't know if this is like a good or a bad thing that I do, but I'm kind of hesitant to admit it. But like, there's some days where I'm just like, something happened and I just don't have the capacity to deal with it or discipline for it because I just feel like I'm overwhelmed or whatever it might be. And so I'll just wait till Hampton comes home and I'll be like, hey, one of our kids did this today. I need you to deal with it.
Yeah. I think that's a good strategy.
Yeah. All right. So let's, everybody, if you can, think of like one good piece of advice for how to hold back from yelling. I'll go first. I think that for me, it is measuring my own level of pressure that I have felt up to that point. And like kind of, I know you got to do it in a split second, but you have to say, is it me or is it them? Is this a me problem or a them problem? If I was feeling really good right now, would this bother me as much as it is? And if the answer is, yeah, it's a you problem, Abby, then I can't raise my voice.
Mine would be to leave the table. And I learned this when I was in corporate lending. When you don't know the answer or you can't figure something out right then, you just say, gosh, I don't know, but I will get back to you. And so with my kids, if I felt like I was losing it and I didn't have a strategy for how to teach this lesson or what the consequence should be, just saying, you know what, you go to your room, I'm going to mine. I'm going to think about this.
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah. To walk away for a minute or 10 or an hour.
Chloe, I'm sure you're not yelling at your baby, but
I yell at my husband.
Especially if he gives you flour for dinner.
Yeah. No, mine's similar to Susan's. I've just learned, and I'm not great at this, but just like if I can feel myself boiling, like don't say anything. It's better just to wait. I can't say anything kind.
Megan, the expert.
Well, not at all. I feel like this is funny. I feel like if I don't have the self-control to not yell, I don't have the self-control to walk away and remove myself from the situation. So I've really tried to work on just this is so dumb, but taking a deep breath and being like, okay, I'm going to talk about this in a calm tone, but it's going to get the point across and I'm just not going to yell it. And I'm going to get down to your level. And I've really tried to explain why I'm frustrated and explain why the situation is bad or I'm upset about the situation or whatever it might be. Because sometimes I feel like he truly, because he's so little, like doesn't see it. He doesn't get why I'm upset about it versus if I just yelled at him for it. He's like, oh, she's just mad. He doesn't understand why I'm upset about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yelling usually makes us feel better, but it doesn't typically fix the problem. So yeah, we've got two really good articles that I'm going to link to in the show notes. One of them is how to get toddlers to listen without yelling. And the other one is 5 ways to get your toddler to listen. So make sure you check those out and give yourself grace. Like you said, Chloe, I think that was last episode maybe, but it's okay. If you yell every once in a while, it's okay. You're not a bad mom. And thank you for listening. Thanks for listening to the iMom podcast. iMom is the motherhood program of the nonprofit organization Family First. Along with our fatherhood program, All Pro Dad, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the iMom Minute, by going to imom.com/subscribe and get tons of great ideas, insight, and inspiration. The iMom podcast is hosted by me, Abby Watts, along with Susan Merrill, Megan Tigner, and Chloe Blumenthal.